right, ladies. I see we have a lady. Sylvia, how are you? First of all, before I can start, good to have you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Good afternoon. I think on your side it is good
Yeah,
afternoon. Yes.
yeah.
How are you doing?
We're good. We're good.
Good.
Now,
Yeah.
um, when I call upon you to speak, kindly put your video on so that we're able to see you. It helps us in the recording. Once again,
My apologies
don't
that
worry.
because I have a young one, 3 months
Oh,
baby. I don't want that baby to be in the video.
It's okay.
okay.
Yeah. Thank you for
All
understanding.
right. All right. So I welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, to yet again another episode of our Uganda Diaspora Show here on Civic Space TV. And today we are talking about a very interesting conversation. Our topic for the day is when democracy trembles. What the riots in Tanzania signal for Uganda's election season. And that means we're taking a look at what's happening down in Tanzania. We've had reports coming in indicate, first of all, that the incumbent President Samia Suluhu won with a landslide and has been declared president-elect of Tanzania with 97.66% votes. I'm still in shock of that amount of the percentage from the vote. We would come to that, but I want us to take a look at briefly what the reports coming in, even when internet has been shut down there. Some reports coming in indicate that hundreds of people have been killed in Tanzania during 3 days of protests following Wednesday's general election. The country's main opposition party is reporting the death toll varies, and a nationwide internet shutdown is making it difficult to verify the numbers. Now, a spokesperson from the opposition Chadema party told AFP news agency that around 700 people had been killed in clashes with security forces. A diplomatic source in Tanzania has told the BBC that there was credible evidence that at least 500 people had died. Now, this is just Tanzania in the neighborhood. The recent electoral unrest there in Cameroon, Madagascar, and even beyond Africa, we have seen issues in Nepal. All these are sort of it's like a wave sweeping across the world. But there's it reflects a widening crisis of confidence in electoral institutions across continents. Citizens are questioning not only the outcomes of elections, but also the processes that produce them, the transparency of electoral bodies, the role of security forces, and the shrinking civic and digital spaces that once promised accountability. Now, as Uganda prepares for its 2026 general elections, these events serve as a sobering mirror reminding us that when elections lose legitimacy, democracy itself becomes fragile. This is why then we are tackling the interesting conversation, the interesting topic of today that is looking at when democracy trembles, what the riots in Tanzania signal for Uganda's election season. I want to begin with Joseph Ochieno. Joseph Ochieno is a political analyst. Is he's been his. I want to call him. I don't want to call him Joseph. Do not take offense. I want to call him maybe the grandfather of UPC for now. His someone recently referred to him as the walking encyclopedia of the UPC. And so, Joseph, I want to start with you. We are seeing a regional wave of sorts. Are these protests signs of democratic awakening? And the most important one is that why did many observers, and most of us actually, find the riots in Tanzania surprising? What do they reveal about the political temperature? Why are we shocked? Well, some people were whispering that the country has often been seen as politically stable, but why are we surprised? Joseph.
Thank you very much, and particularly for your generosity in edging me to the other extreme. Um, yes, wouldn't qualify as an expert on Tanzania, but I am definitely reasonably placed to contextualize the contemporary historical polity of particularly Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, the traditional three East African community nation states. To that end, I would actually want to suggest to you that I'm not particularly surprised, but I genuinely understand why people are shocked and surprised about the situation in TZ. To the extent that we as Africans in more recent times have fallen prey to expert reference and use of authority from one foreign, predominantly Western media as a basis of, if you like, giving and granting authority to our political discourse, in many cases, including economic discourse. It's not surprising, therefore, that we saw froth rather than genuine undercurrents. But number two, Tanzania has had the most generous press for some reason because of Julius Nyerere, whom we may begin now to review in a much more critical way. Julius Nyerere, Milton Obote, and indeed Jomo Kenyatta were founding parents of these nation states, but also founding parents of this African community. At independence, Uganda faced its internal contradictions as it was building its foundation for democracy. Kenya did, and so did Tanzania. What is actually not reported is that Tanzania used brutality to silence its opposition. Now, simply because there was no coup, and simply because Nyerere managed to stay longest of the three East African leaders, and particularly because poor old Milton Obote was successfully overthrown in 71 and in 85, and that in between those coups and overthrows were leading forces of global political and economic interest and media interest. The narrative has been more recently now built that Tanzania, away from its so-called Ujamaa socialism, that it was a stable and a fair country under Julius Nyerere. And for Nyerere to do the most perfect thing that Mr. Museveni ought to learn from, successfully retires, hands over power, and since then there have been relatively, in fact, genuinely smooth transitions. And for that, the image across the East African community has presented Tanzania as stable. Now, that is the stability that Mr. Museveni can always boast about in Uganda, that, oh, we've been around for the last 40 years, and for that reason we are stable. But no, nearly half of the 40 years of Mr. Museveni's reign saw brutality in northern Uganda. And so we sort of let these guys get away with it. The country that actually officially ran as a one-party state of the three East African countries is Tanzania. The country that tried pluralism, took it a bit longer, and then banned the opposition in a particular way is Kenya. The country that never went a one-party state is Uganda. And but because, as I say, the Obote government was unfortunate that in 1971 it was overthrown and pushed by Western media and Western press, the perception between the three is that Obote was the worst of all those people. It's interesting that in recent times we were having a conversation, and including my good brother Jimmy, with whom we now fundamentally disagree on constitutional matters. And I remember him raising this in a public forum, and nobody responded. But look, show us a clause where in the 60s the political parties were banned. In other words, where Uganda was declared a one-party state. It wasn't. It was simply following the assassination attempts in 1969 of Dr. Milton Obote, that the then Home Affairs Minister, Grace, Bazi Batarangaya, who had actually crossed from the Democratic Party, issued an emergency order. And under the circumstance, you could actually say that they were right and justifiable. And before the repeal of that, Idi Amin came and overthrew the government. What am I saying? Of the three East African countries, the one that has, with the exception of Idi Amin's uh, 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 military dictatorship and Mr. Museveni's monolithic one-party state, has been Uganda. Tanzania managed because, as I said, with the ban of political parties, then we went CCM, Chama cha Mapinduzi administration, very monolithic. So you guys, you see what longevity in power does in Uganda. And so in Tanzania, partly because of that stability, partly because of relative stability in court, and partly because of Julius Nyerere, and partly because of the purging of the opposition, and then later when they opened up the space, in the 90s, and so the transition forward was smooth. What you see there is a mini perception. And quickly, come 1979, where Tanzanian forces um, uh, back the Ugandan liberators and get rid of Idi Amin. The Tanzanian army, the manner in which they conducted themselves in Uganda, generally, they were not only seen as liberators, but their tone, their cultural presentation was so mild that we've now had, particularly from the Ugandan perspective, seen the Tanzanians as the calmer, less aggressive of the three East African communities, which by and large culturally as a tradition may be. Politically, what was happening? As I said, these guys continue the one-party system. The economic challenges that Tanzania faced, you can't compare it with Kenya, certainly could not compare it with Uganda. So, but they managed to sustain themselves with that. So away from Nyerere come the successive three leaders prior to Magufuli. Somehow they went into economic reforms and generally sought to invest using now foreign capital successfully in infrastructure and thankfully to them in terms of commodities and some of the discoveries in terms of essential natural resources. Tanzania then presented itself as really the emerging uh, center of East Africa. Finally, what happens? Magufuli comes in, bangs the table, changes the political trajectory, checks corruption, invests in Tanzania. The country and the economy seems to be working. Somehow he annoys certain forces. Magufuli goes, his vice president emerges. Who is she? It's a woman, one. Two, it's a woman. No, so two elements that by and large is globally vulnerable. So we see this woman, and for me, I also then got it wrong. I see this woman who was able to shake hands with the opposition and join with young people, and we thought, wow, Tanzania had arrived. Last year, when I went together with the delegation, we went to Julius Nyerere's home. You see Tanzanians, how they behave, but you also look around socially, and then you realize that there's an undercurrent of disparity. There's an undercurrent of despair. There is a total control system that exists that simply needed an exploit. Unfortunately for them, impunity took over, as it is the case generally in Uganda, and the manner in which they treated the opposition in the last elections. Then come this other time, you decide that you're going to run yourself and no other opponent because two of the most important contenders, Chadema leader and the leader of Chadema leader, you imprison him. Then was Lendo, you ban it. And then what happens? You think that you're able to take the citizens of Tanzania, who are predominantly young, who have access to Facebook, who have access to internet, who have access to 24-hour television, who come to Uganda to study, who also by and large cross borders, although they don't do much, they see what's happening in Kenya. And they simply say that, no, we cannot continue like this, hence the explosion. I think it's a surprise to a few of them. It may be a surprise to the authorities there. It would be very worrying if it was a surprise to their security services.
Indeed. Thank you, Joseph, for that. You usher us into a very interesting point because then we look at, if you remember, not so long ago, these demonstrations in Dar es Salaam, Arusha, and Dodoma, Wednesday and Thursday, in response to the fallout from the general election, they bring up memories of the Zanzibar riots that followed the 2000 polls, which left at least about 35 people dead, according to human rights reports. But now, the picture you have painted is that it was a volcano bound to erupt at some point, because from your visit, then you're seeing there's a lot of disgruntlement here and there, and it was not, it is there silently, but not silent anymore, because now it has exploded. I come to you, Dr. Ochen. With all that at play, why are we surprised at Tanzania? We are here in Uganda. In fact, majority of Ugandans are like, "What? We did not see that coming from Tanzania." In fact, we thought this would happen here in Uganda before Tanzania, and here we are, Dr. Chen.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Greetings, good afternoon, good morning, depending, I think, where you are. Otherwise, the occurrences in Tanzania are very telling, and they've been Latin in the sense that most people didn't expect it to be this way. But if you followed, the Tanzanian kind of politics and the general emerging trends and challenges of electoral democracy in Africa in general, then Tanzania was no exception. Because with Tanzania, for almost from 1960, pretty much, one party has completely dominated, the arena, and the rest of the parties are just there for show. The only kind of surface during electoral periods, and they don't count much because, as my colleague Joseph stated, in fact, Julius Nyerere was a heavy-handed leader to a large extent that the opposition in Tanzania in the 60s and 70s were under pressure and were persecuted heavily. So when I see sometimes even our own leaders in Uganda want to crown our elder statesman like Julius Nyerere as a saint, that is telling, because he managed to keep the country one as a one unit, but the opposition, the dissenting voices, were not given spaces. So for me, what transpired in what took place in Tanzania, or what's transpiring in Tanzania right now, to a large degree, is not a surprise. But I didn't expect it at this particular moment. I knew that one day, one time, there will be some kind of electoral and political volcano in that part of East Africa. You realize the CCM party is dominant, very dominant. The other different voices are never seen or we've never heard. They have never even been in government. It's only CCM business in managing Tanzania. But I'm not very surprised, because I know that Julius Nyerere tried very much to unite Tanganyika and Zanzibar. There's a very strong kind of disconnect between the mainland and the island of Zanzibar. In fact, there are some proponents even on the island in Zanzibar who wish to break away from the mainland. So is Julius Nyerere kind of emphasize that there should be some kind of rotational leadership. You know, if at one stage maybe the vice is from Zanzibar, the president from the mainland, no, that way. But still, you realize that during elections, there are always more violence on the island in Zanzibar as compared to the mainland. So I would think, in the long run, I don't know how sustainable this, Tanganyika and Zanzibar, cohesion and unity will last. But seeing what the Gen Zs in Tanzania are doing is not surprising, because I'm sure they witnessed from their neighbors in Kenya. They are being cheered up by their neighbors in Kenya. And as I was telling, Joseph, that in fact there were some Kenyans, even youth, who are trying to actually to sneak into TZ, to kind of ferment the entire kind of demonstrations and the protests. And this has been witnessed. So the world now is a global village. And what happens in one place, you know, can easily take place in another place. But one thing is clear that the Tanzanian army is a little bit professional to a large degree compared like to our own in Uganda. If you notice, even the local population at one stage went on the military barracks to request the military to take over. They have faith in the military than even the political class. And if you observed, the military have not been very heavy-handed. There might have been some death here and there, but it would have been worse if they were to be extremely heavy-handed. Because observing and watching from a distance, I also noticed that the youth were being destructive. They were looting, they were burning down, uh, infrastructures and buildings. So in any country, the police and the army will have to somehow, somewhere, intervene, and that might have caused some death, but I don't know how many. Others are saying 800, 500. These are not, confirmed figures, depending on the sources. I also kind of have question marks on some of the sources because I think also there's some biases from certain quarters, especially the West, towards Tanzania at the moment, especially the current head of state. One, she's a lady. Two, being also a Muslim, that also might invite more critics from the Western world and assumptions. So I'm not very sure of the sources of some of the things of the death, the numbers, the figures. I'm not very sure about that. But in general, what transpired in Tanzania should be kind of a good lesson to our own country, Uganda, in the sense that if at all our institutions like electoral commission continues to abuse, the will and the wishes of the people of Uganda, one day, one time, we might encounter or experience the same kind of, situation that is taking place in Tanzania. Though Uganda is a different terrain, as I stated, our military are a little bit, subjective and heavy-handed. So you find that our people are very sensitive to tear gas. When you just shoot in the air a few times and you tear gas in Uganda, people might, take cover and vanish because they know the dangers from the military, police, and the army of our country. So that's the difference. But I think what took place in Tanzania is a good platform to initiate dialogue, between the ruling party CCM and the opposition. I would not expect the CCM to start ground standing. I think this is a good opportunity to, in fact, to build and improve on some of the infrastructures that have been abused. So institutional infrastructure like the EC, Electoral Commission, the police that have become very subjective. The police lately, they've been detaining those with, divergent views and opinion. The political opponents and the civic leaders have been, detained. Even the social media and internet shutdowns have been there. So I think this particular incident might be a good moment to review what's taking place in Tanzania. But historically, I think Uganda has been judged harshly, especially Dr. Mitro Obote and DPC have been judged very harshly by historians. If you compare Julius Nyerere and Jomo Kenyatta and Dr. Mitro Obote, they operated in very variant political environments at the time. So I think it's important that maybe in the future, historians should review their kind of submissions on these past leaders. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ochen, for that. I want to come to you, Francis. Francis, we have seen it is not just Tanzania. There's a lot of growing disgruntlement. There's a lot of growing tension. It is simmering. It is there. It is. It's as if it wants to boil over, but still big help there. But for Tanzania, it has just it has gone up. Do you think these riots a reaction to just the mayor election results, or are these a reflection of deeper frustrations with governance and accountability? And let's not just look at Tanzania alone. Look at what happened in Madagascar. Look at what happened in Cameroon, and what might actually. I don't want to be a doomsayer. I hope it doesn't happen. But there's that similar, almost similar feeling around us here in Uganda.
Thank you, Lynn, for a well-loaded question. And other fellow panelists, Ochen and Joseph, and then Aslivia, have had the submission from Ochen and Joseph, and I agree with them. Back to your question, Lynn, as a student of history, if I may take you back during the French Revolution, and in particular, the 1848 revolutions, they have similar characteristics. Now, let's come back to the question that you asked. If you look at the country we have talked about, Tanzania, Uganda, Cameroon, even go to the rest of the countries, they have something in common. The first one, they all have suppressed their subjects or the people of their countries by a one-party rule. And that is for at least all of them for about 20 years and above. Uganda, 20 years, for example. That is from 1986 to around 2006 when we opened for multi-party politics, 20 years. Now, when you go to Cameroon, it is almost from around 1961 up to around 1990, about 31 years. If you go to Tanzania, I think multi-party politics was opened in around the 1992. Also, if you calculate, about 30 years. So that speaks volume, that it's not that people are ignorant or they don't know what is taking place. You can suppress them for some time, but you can't suppress them for forever. Whether it is deep-seated grievances or mayor elections, no, Lynn, it is deep-seated grievances, like as it is in Uganda. Every time you come to talk or to say, okay, we can have a conversation, but what the answers you receive is, we're a mass party. We have 20 million registered members. and then you wonder what kind of thinking. And power corrupts. Every time people are in power, they think they are indispensable. They have the world in their hands, little knowing that these are Ugandans, or these are people that as you press them more and more, they reach at a time when there is an out. Now, when you look at all these, we will look at a series of things. Number one, we should agree that in all these countries, they have defranchised their citizens. We don't have the right to vote. Even when we vote, our votes don't count. That's why you see there is mass rigging. I will give you an example. NRM saying that they have 20 million registered members. Do they register children? The answer is no, meaning they register adults. Children in Uganda are about 20-something millions out of 40-something. So does it mean then that the NRM, it's all the adults in Uganda are members of the NRM? That is a precursor for rigging. They are planning so that when they rig, we know it is a mass party, which is false. The Electoral Commission will tell you the registered voters are not more than 18 million. So, which speaks then the NRM maybe has all the voters and then a surplus. I don't know from where, you can't tell. So all these are things that people analyze and look at, and then we say no. Now, when you look at the second point, the electoral reforms, in all these countries, there are electoral reforms that are always suggested, but they don't come to fruition. Why? Because of the repressive nature of the incumbents or the government in power. And I have always said this: collapse of the institutions of government. So now when you come to crown it all, human rights abuse, which is excess. You know, our leaders, or most especially political leaders, they don't serve, they are no longer serving their countries, but instead they want their countries to serve them. And this is evident. You've heard our president has said he's not a servant of anybody and he's not working for anybody. Therefore, when people are fed up with that, they say, okay, let's take matters in our hands and work for ourselves, or also fight our way out. You have said, God forbid it should not happen in Uganda, but it will happen anyway. It is just a matter of time. If we don't realize, Lynn, let's just be honest. If we don't realize it will happen, who knew that this would happen in Tanzania? Well, for us, we knew that will happen in Tanzania, especially because I used to interact with the youth, or interacting with youth and people of my age in Tanzania. And I knew what is happening, and people are tired. You can imagine, again, when you look at all these three countries you are talking about, and others where such a revolution has happened, the one party system that dominates and keeps subjugating. For Cameroon and Uganda, by the way, all of them are called movements. The National Resistance Movement, isn't it the one in I think Uganda, if I'm not mistaken. Then when you go to Cameroon, we have the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement. It is also a movement. So I could have a problem with the word movement in terms of how they take people for granted. But all in all, Lynn, I should say that for sure, deep-seated grievances. If I were, the last time I was reading the constitution, comparing the constitution of Tanzania and Uganda, and I was looking at similarities in as far as human rights is concerned, like guaranteeing human rights, freedom of speech. But then when you come to its practice, it is completely zero. The same applies to Cameroon, by the way. Although their constitution, part of it, I was just trying to translate some French kind of connotations and so on. But I think for Uganda, we have to. But do we even learn a lesson, our leaders? No. Our leaders, I think they are used of pushing them out is the language they understand. But it is so absurd, but it is important as the East African community to learn. And for the leaders to know that we are operating in a global village. What affects your neighbor automatically will affect you. And I pray that our political leaders realize and come back to their senses, or sense will be inculcated into them. Thank you.
Right. Since what I hope we don't reach that very sad moment. But you see, in Tanzania, we see that videos of youths were chanting, "We want our country and we don't want CCM." And let me come to you, Sylvia. If you're informed and aware of Tanzania's history, you know that CCM, Chama cha Mapinduzi, has been the it party. Well, I think it is a bit even older than the NRM here back in Uganda. And if they're done and tired with CCM, Imagine, we saw that Tanzania's protests did not stop at the colonial borders carved by imperialism. In the south, at the Chela crossing in Mbeya region, protesters from neighboring Malawi confronted Tanzanian border security. I beg your pardon. Okay, sorry about that. I was trying to say that from Malawi, they wanted to join the Tanzanian border, forcing officials to flee as dozens of youth crossed into Tanzania to join demonstrations. In the north, Kenyan media reported security forces having blocked groups of young Kenyans at the Namanga crossing who attempted to enter Tanzania in solidarity. I am reading that earlier today, brought a little bit of shock to me, because I'm thinking, what could have happened if it were Uganda? Yeah. And so, Slavia, I ask, could Uganda experience similar unrest if public trust in the Electoral Commission and political processes remains low? And we have seen this. If you look back at the 2021 general elections, there was wide disregard for the Electoral Commission. They've lost trust in the Electoral Commission, but also in the political processes and the security apparatus of the country. Slavia.
Once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, moderator and esteemed fellow panelists. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this critical and timely discussion. I deeply appreciate the professionalism with which this forum or platform has been organized, and I commend you for such an engaging dialogue. I wish also to acknowledge the insights and contributions from my fellow panelists, that your perspectives enrich our collective understanding in a meaningful way. That being said, first we'll give a recommendation, Liz, that to strengthen the future engagements of this platform, I would like to respectfully suggest that discussion topics be circulated in advance, because this would not only allow us as panelists sufficient time to research and prepare, but would also enable us to present evidence-based, well-developed opinions that contribute to the depth and clarity of these important conversations. So I believe this slight adjustment would further elevate the quality of this platform. Well, now that being said, coming to today's topic, in light with the recent election, with what is happening in Tanzania, I think I will approach this from a background of being a Pan-Africanist, a strong supporter of East African community, and definitely a Ugandan. I think it is very important to set the record straight, especially for those seeking to, unfairly blame the Tanzania's current president and what is happening. I believe as responsible citizens and patriotic members of the East African community, we must recognize that what is unfolding in Tanzania is not a failure of leadership, but rather an attempt to certain groups, particularly radicalized youth networks with hidden agendas, to destabilize not just Tanzania, but the broader East African region. We have all seen that the powerhouse woman president, Samia Suluhu, has shown exemplary leadership under difficult circumstances. She has also taken bold steps to open political and civic space in Tanzania. Uh, she has initiated diplomatic engagements across borders, and she has also strengthened the economic ties within the East African region. And also, she has prioritized women's inclusion in governance. So these are undeniable contributions that have elevated Tanzania's standing both regionally and internationally. So while the critics rush to condemn and but they conveniently ignore the meticulous progress this woman powerhouse president has spearheaded to boost regional stability and cooperation. So, from enhancing cross border trade to advancing peace efforts within the Great Lakes region, honestly, her leadership is not only for Tanzania, but for the entirety of the East African region. So I think the real question should be why this is happening in Tanzania. But what are we as East Africans prepared to do in response? Because if we believe in our shared future, in our collective stability, and in the capability leadership of those who still stand for unity, like President Samia, like the likes of President uh, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who I call the father of not only East African region, but the entire Africa. I think it is time for us to stand firm and speak with one voice. We need to stand and protect our region, defend our leaders when they lead with vision, and also reject every attempt to weaken the peace we have fought so hard to build the East African region. And we must stand uh, together and we must stand together and see the word or the, the the achievements that our countries and the region have so far achieved through our strong bordered leaders. So for me, Liz, as I conclude, to me, this is very clear. This crisis is not just the Tanzanians, you know, it is the East Africa's or Africa's test, and and actually Tanzania's president deserves support, not to blame. And as a united region, we should refuse to allow destabilizing forces to undo the progress our leaders have built over decades. And like I said earlier, we must stand together in defense of peace, security, and shared prosperity. Because when one pillar of East Africa stands strong, the entire house stands firm. Over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Indeed, and you bring in that sobering, the more promising and comforting bit of it. And apologies that the question or the topic of the day was not sent out in time. We will do better next time. I see Dr. Chisambira has joined us, and he's saying something in the chat room before I can give him the floor. Sylvia, do you think these I beg your pardon. I think, let me read this right. Do you think there is a dilemma among African leaders? I think, then Francis says, I think Sylvia downplays dissenting voices as radical use is missing the major point. And Chisambe is clarifying, I mean, the East African leaders. So before we can come back to get your reactions to what has been said so far, Dr. Chisambe, you have just joined us and I welcome you to the show. We are looking at what's happening in Tanzania, of course, taking a bigger lens and using it across the region, but importantly, across Uganda. We are seeing the growing limited credibility of some of electoral processes around us, and they're not occurring in isolation, but in part of a concerted effort by certain incumbents or ruling parties to further insulate themselves from the public will and popular accountability. And this has been said by political analysts across. The question here is, Dr. Chisambira, is the unrest in Tanzania an isolated incident or part of a broader regional trend where elections are triggering crisis rather than consensus?
Thank you so much, Lynn. Good evening to everyone. Nice to see you, Elder, after the meeting last evening. My Elder from the UPC. Nice to see you, Coach, Francis, and Sylvia. And thank you, Lynn, the moderator. I hope you can hear me well. You see, there's this crisis is not only in the Great Lakes region. I think it's a crisis that has been across, it's been sweeping across Africa and maybe the global south as a whole. There's a problem that we've had, okay, I don't know whether I should call it a regime of leaders across Africa who have chosen to stay longer than they were initially supposed to stay. So when I listened to Sylvia saying that there is something to protect, I think I need to remind her that once, as we are protecting the little that you're thinking, I think there is much that we have lost. Last evening, someone, I don't know whether it was a jargon or something, but said one time someone was assuring the chicken that they need to eat more eggs in order to collect more eggs. Something like that. If Lynn, you're remembering it well, you remind me. But this is what Sylvia is trying to state here. We do not need to eat a lot more eggs in order to collect more eggs. You understand? So there is no justification for whatever injustices and attack on democracy that you can put forward to defend what is happening in the East African countries. And actually, not only East Africa, from Central Africa across towards this side of the East Africa. It's a great wave that needs a lot of change. And something inevitable is happening. We are not going to avoid this kind of a regional but geopolitical spillage, whether you like it or not. Ugandans, I believe, are picking a leaf of what is happening in Tanzania, and do not be surprised or not be caught by surprise if you see the same happening here back home. Because once the tenets of democracy are attacked in one way or the other, for example, it started as a small thing in Tanzania. As you're saying, she has fostered regional integration, she has maybe enhanced regional trade and all that. So what explains this shrinkage of the civic space? What explains the shrinkage in the in the digital democracy? Because internet is shut down. I think it was first of all it started as a shutdown of Twitter, and then later it escalated to shutting down the internet. And then you'll find that people who represent other voices down there are put into a corner and boxed into one corner that they do not have to speak. They are closed up in jail, and you are pretending to be contesting with these people. So however much silver or gold you have to sell to us in a certain package, then this other image of yours is quite big tainted that it is going to spoil this little silver or gold that you're pretending to be selling to us. So Sylvia, I think yes, if we've earned something positive, it is our duty to protect it and make sure we perpetuate it. I mean, we create its longevity with reasons and foundations. But also, we do not have to spend much. The cost of protecting this should not really be the one that goes with our throats down. You understand? If you hear today that 700 lives plus have been lost in Tanzania because of an election, then the leader is worse than you think. This leader has not added a brick. They have contributed to the wreckage. I don't think the spirits of the Nyereres and the rest are happy where they are because of what is happening in Tanzania. Because Tanzania has been, a role model in the region for fostering democracy, learning from how they've been doing their transitions. Even when tragedies like loss of a sitting president happened to them, the country never ran into unrest because there was good preparation of how power and transitions should happen. Things were so clear. So the only democratic space that was left for them to speak the voice and they're used to has been shrinked by a woman whom they had not tested before. But on their first test, I mean, this is so difficult for them as a test. And lastly, without fear of contradiction, all these uprisings and the chaos that we are seeing in our region, I think it's because the young leaders in the region are reading from an old book, which book has solutions of the past, not of the present. Yet the inevitable demographic shift of in terms of what comprises our populations, that the younger population is bigger than the elder population in the East Africa. The old solutions that these leaders, the young leaders are reading from, do not apply. So when where do they get the experience? President William Ruto is in his first term. President Samia Suluhu has just, maybe if all goes well, is just assuming her second term. I think they are all reading from someone who has stayed a little bit longer. And when they go to them for consultation of how the opponents are treated, or how people who maybe, in quotes, have a right in their constitution maybe to demonstrate or show dissatisfaction or demand for accountability in such a way that is beyond what they expect. If they expected accountability to come on a silver plate and it's not coming, and they have an idea of rising up or going to the streets, how they are treated in the place where someone has proved that they can stay longer on control, on the knob for 40 good years. I mean, the solution that they will get is that lock them up, repress them, shut down the internet. I mean, they are reading from an old book which has solutions that do no longer work in this current era. That is the same reason as to why in the past, like in the previous election, 2021, people believed the strong opposition strongholds, parties around here, did not have either representatives or voters, or they would not make a following in areas distant from the capital. But today, when you follow the trail of the different presidential candidates, especially the red camp, I think they are pulling numbers even when they go up there. It is because the young people are now more enlightened. The young people are seeing that the solution of the old book are not answering the current questions. So if our young leaders in the region are continuing to read from the same script, this is not going to work, and we are going to see the same problems happening in those countries happening back here home. And it's not going to be a national problem. It's going to be a regional problem. That, like you're seeing that Kenyans are being blocked on the border from crossing over to Tanzania, you'll see Tanzanians and Kenyans wanting to cross over to Uganda. Over to you, Lynn.
Absolutely. And that is my biggest fear because someone was whispering, saying, but hey, the silence with the ongoing campaigns is worrying. I mean, what? Guys, come on. We should be happy it is silent. We're not violent yet. At least the campaign's a bit quiet and we are seeing some progress. Hopefully it sticks that way. Francis in the chat room says Slivia stating that Museveni is the father of Africa and East Africa is an overstating phrase. For your information, the founding fathers of ESC are Nyerere, Obote, and Kenyatta. You can invite Museveni to genuinely emulate them, though I see him politically and ideologically exhausted. Okay, Chisamira says, I'm actually happy that the campaign is peaceful. Oh, great, great. So I come back to you, Joseph. And we are seeing, I want us to look, I don't want us to just keep it here in Uganda. It's huge, and with this, the Malawians trying to come into Tanzania, Kenyans coming into Tanzania to support fellow East Africans speaks a lot. Now, from Dar es Salaam to Kampala, from Yaoundé to Antananarivo, citizens are sending a message. Democracy cannot survive on rituals. And Joseph, I think I've had this conversation with you before about democracy. It must rest on trust. The challenge before Uganda is not only to vote, but to believe once again that the vote counts. What do these events then tell us about how power, opposition politics, and state control interact in Africa?
I just want to put a quick note that unfortunately I will not be excited up to the end of the program. I may have to leave, but Lynn, you have been chasing me up for many a time, and I'm delighted that today I've been able to be with you, however briefly. So I'll try to make it possibly as conclusive as I possibly could. Now, I must also take a quick one with my sister Sylvia. I'm a little bit surprised actually at the contextual background. But I would want to say that on this panel, as I said at the beginning, I have a relative privilege. I am the should be president of Uganda People's Congress. I am the should be president of Uganda People's Congress if it were the case that the rule of law works, the constitution works, and that the judiciary actually works. And for that, it also means, therefore, that I've got the privilege of knowing reasonably substantially relationships and experiences of political parties and organizations in this region. Earlier this morning, I was telling another program that I am the most conflicted because CCM is a sister party to Uganda People's Congress. Looking at and seeing what's happening in CCM today and how they're conducting themselves, looking at the challenges that our other sister party, the African National Congress, has faced recently, considering some of the related issues, and seeing even some of the conversations taking place in SWAPO in Namibia. These are our sister parties. And looking at the historical context in which Uganda People's Congress, led by Milton Obote, CCM with Julius Nyerere, and indeed UNIP with Kenneth Kaunda, committed themselves, those three leaders, one for the push for the liberation of Southern Africa, together with Oliver Tambo, then who was heading ANC, and then to see what these guys were genuinely pushing for their countries and continent, and to see that Julius Nyerere, to his credit, when Idi Amin was imposed on Ugandans by imperialist forces in 1971, Julius Nyerere took a stand, took a position, and said no, rejected Idi Amin, and in a way contributed to the liberation of Uganda together with Idi Amin. Whatever he did and his country did to Ugandans is neither here nor there. Now, if you take it from there, and you take the context and language of these leaders, if you take it from the perspective that I said earlier, that I think the most disadvantaged of this is Milton Obote in terms of the tests, if you can put it, and that Tanzania was really never tested publicly until about now. And if you can consider that Milton Obote told Julius Nyerere in 1975 when they were in Musasini in Dar es Salaam, in Tanzania at the time, that it is important for us to retire when we're still popular. Milton Obote was not able to do so. Nyerere sort of managed to do so. Fast forward to where we are. I want to speak to Tanzania for one. It is completely unacceptable what is happening in Tanzania under a CCM government, which should be a sister party organization, having governed for all this time. I told another program, actually post the reforms of President Magufuli, which was radically radical, almost like, if you like, a counter-revolutionary operation after Tanzania opened up itself to Western market forces that in many cases comes with corruption. And then President Samia comes in. There is absolutely no reason why CCM administration would not have worked on a manifesto, worked on a program, gone to the people. Yes, with the possible risk of losing election, but losing election does not mean the end of the world. But sell the programs that they've had in terms of infrastructure, opening up in terms of education and other services, and then go and seeing stability. And maybe ask for you, Lynn and Mio Cheno, as communication expert, and go and tell their youth what if, in terms of their past to gain, I mean, rather to protect, in terms of stability, in terms of their track record, in terms of their position on the African continent, perhaps they would have voted for them. But to see that this is happening, and then you go ahead and ban opposition, incarcerate opposition, and do what you actually did, is extremely difficult to defend. But broadly in context, I think, as some of my colleagues say, if you see what has been happening in Uganda, the crude impunity over 40 years, if you see what happened in Kenya, including the post-election violence in Kenya, and if you see some of the things that happened then in Southern Africa, and you see the nonsensical mess taking place in Cameroon with a guy who can hardly sit and stand up, it's not surprising that Tanzanian young people have got a right to come up. You know what? For me, it's possibly not even about the age of the leaders in terms of young or old. It's really an ideological drive. Some of the most sensible global leaders today, my most favorite politician in the West is Bernie Sanders, is an old senator. He pushes an ideological agenda consistent with mine, but consistent with what really the African youth would want to see and experience in Tanzania and across the continent. I think we need to be having a fresher debate. And Lynn, this is a Center for Constitution program. I was delighted to have been part of this, the CCG program, where we are mobilizing young people, engaging them in debates, training and teaching them how to debate. But it's not about debating, engaging them and enabling them to become critical thinkers so that they look around themselves as a nation, look around themselves as this continent. And I hope, therefore, that these emergent new leaders find it completely unacceptable that a few individuals, a few families could push impunity the manner in which they do. And that perhaps they can read history correctly so that they see that our founding parents was about independence, but independence was about our resources and enabling possibilities and the capacities for them. That Tanzania learns from China how to make the best of Tanzanian resources for Tanzanians, and that within the context of so-called democracy, that we have a sense of ownership, but also a sense of tolerance. We are talking about Raila Odinga. I was in Bondo in Siaya the other day, seeing him off, and I was lucky to be there at the burial. Part of what is being discussed is a question of tolerance. I saw Ruto in humility. I saw Kenyatta in humility. I had seen Museveni almost being confined in humility in a different context earlier this year. These are the things that we should be able to require from our leaders, to simply say that you can agree to disagree politically, but push an agenda that is purely an Africanist agenda. I think on this occasion, African leaders are getting it wrong. Finally, as I hinted earlier, I had genuinely hoped that President Jakaya Kikwete would, on his retirement, take on the leadership of banging the table on behalf of Africa as a continent, as a deep thinker, to replace President Thabo Mbeki, complement President Thabo Mbeki, who is now older and less visible and loud, on the question of dismantling the unacceptable dictatorial system on the continent, but mobilizing and organizing our resources for African youth and young Africans. that in the absence of the African Union, which is quiet at the moment, in the absence of the leaders of the frontline states that were Milton Obote, Kenneth Kaunda, and Julius Nyerere, with Oliver Tambo for total liberation of Africa, take away the early independent staff of Kwame Nkrumah, Milton Obote, Julius Nyerere, and Anthony Diop, who are simply saying we want to regroup and reclaim our Africa and push forward, this continent to emancipate the future of our continent. That these guys have gone, and the people, some of whom were schooled by these people, are today worse than the colonialists that we pushed away. So, yes, granted, I don't know what is it that we should protect on the continent, because it can easily get patronizing. That because we've been ruled by one man for 40 years, we call it stability, so it's okay. And that because Tanzania has not had war with the neighboring countries directly, so there's a stability or something for us to protect. I don't know what it is. These leaders, if elected, you get elected, have the mandate, own your program, get tested, deliver, wait for the next elections, whatever it is, sell your programs to the people. And if the people say no, you return home. That really is something that we expect to happen in Tanzania. I want that to happen in Uganda. That is what should really be happening across the continent. And by the way, usually when we say this, some of us say, oh, because we imported Western style democracy, which does not work. That is not true, Lynn. Multipartyism at independence in Uganda worked. It worked and we delivered. It was until 1971 when Idi Amin was used to break up the Milton Obote administration, call him anything else in terms of the other policies, the issues with the lost counties, the issues of Uganda. But by and large, the government delivered and parliament functioned. That parliament was more illiterate in terms of literacy today. That parliament didn't have the internet, but they delivered. By and large, I think across the continent, these early independence leaders, there is something that happened. When new liberalist agenda guys came in and started compromising founding parents of Africa and breaking them and killing them and beginning to use stooges like they did under power. I'm saying this one. And for example, in Zimbabwe, where Robert Mugabe was the bad man, and indeed he was a bad man and went to the extreme. So they use Morgan Tsvangirai, but the issue is Tsvangirai as an alternative, but Tsvangirai as an alternative agenda to push an imperialist agenda. By the way, that's the only reason why I remained with supporting ZANU-PF in principle. I'm not saying that there's any indication about that in Chadema. Chadema is a right-wing political party, but I think, like Steve said, I have no evidence that they're being used by external forces. But if they're really purely a conservative political party that I don't necessarily agree with, but all they're also seeking is to sell their conservative agenda to the young Tanzanians, and if the young Tanzanians pick it up, so be it. In America, conservative, Trump, extremist, racist in the morning, in the afternoon, progressive, left, Democrats. In Britain, at the moment, it's the Labour Party, whose leadership is not necessarily as much of what is supported by the progressive left. And once in a while, the conservatives come and take it. That is politics, and that's democracy around the world. What is it that some of our current leaders today, including this Bagbo here, rather, Ouattara, is it in Cote d'Ivoire, who was used, by imperialists to replace, and I knew it, and we saw it, to replace a guy who was to the left of politics. Granted, it was not perfect. The guy comes in and now he does not want to go. What is it amongst African leaders? So no, young Africans ought to wake up. Wake up and say no. Wake up and demand and claim your spaces. Wake up and take over. Wake up and read history and recognize that it is possible for this continent to be pluralistically democratic. It is possible to govern after 4 and 5 years and return home and wait for another time. And it's also possible to do so without necessary use of arms. And finally, it's actually possible for us to serve this continent without being agents of foreign forces.
Right. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so very much. And that indeed pretty much sums up what we are doing already, but what we ought to do even more as we try to speak up. And maybe we could see some change. Slow as it may come, maybe some effect will be realized. Dr. Sambila, in the chat room
So do you mind me closing off now, if you don't mind? Unless there's a question for me quickly, if you don't mind it. Anybody wants a question to comment quickly so that I can.
Dr. Chisembe says, thank you, Honorable Cheno. Let the work you have done speak for you. You don't need to use hard power to pull masses on your side. I think in reference to what you talked about, and it's not a question, it's, I think a comment. And I thank you very much for taking time to join us.
Absolute pleasure.
All
Blessings.
Let's
right.
start us soon.
Africa is possible. Just believe in better. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so I come to Dr. Ochen. Dr. Ochen, looking back at Uganda's 2021 general elections, of course, they were marked by violence, internet shutdowns, and arrests, and lots of human rights violations. I do not recall, maybe I have forgotten, maybe, but I do not recall the role, the East African community having a say. I do not recall the AU saying anything. I have not heard the same about what's happening in Tanzania. But what role should these regional bodies be playing in promoting electoral integrity? Do they even have that mandate? Can they, come up as regional bodies and say, "Come on, we have to do A, B, C, D if we are to realize the best for the continent"?
Thank you very much, Lynn, and fellow panelists. I think these regional bodies, during the inceptions, the objectives, for creating these bodies were very clear, to provide checks and balances and support to their sister countries. In the last elections we had in Uganda, that was 2021, I did not see the East African Cooperation, coming out to point out some of the heavy, handedness of the ruling party at that time. When I remember, Bobby Wine, Chagulanyi, the NUP candidate was being arrested and even detained. The same to the FDC candidate, Amuriel Patrick, too, was, detained and in the relationship, he had to want to campaign barefoot, just to show his discontent, in protests. But I didn't see anything from the AU or from the East African Cooperation. Why? I think the AU, to me, is a platform for African efforts for now, where they gather from time to time and take champagne and and have coffee with each other. They are there to support each other. On very few occasions that they come out to point out and condemn their fellow colleagues when there's any form of electoral or political injustice in the area. So for Uganda, in the last elections, there was no any kind of Pan-Africanist body that came out to point out the contradictions that was taking place at that time. And I can see too in Tanzania, I've not had any strong statement coming out from the East African Cooperation or the AU or IGAD or even SADC. I've not seen any strong statement coming out. And also on this note, I want to just comment briefly on the submissions by my sister Sylvia. That is kind of related to this, about the current president of Tanzania. Yes, indeed. When she took over from Magufuli, she was admired by many around the world. She came out as, a voice for reconciliation and reach out the opponents and release the opponents. Yeah. So to point out the weekends of of any leader is not being extreme. It takes time to build a home or a house, but you can burn down your house in a day. So she might have done tremendous work or contributions in the past or presently, but this act itself maintains the victory she has attained. Okay? At 98%, with all what's taking place out there, it's very hard to convince the world. Yeah, just like even Kaguta Yoweri Museveni, I heard you very passionately saying he's a father of an African continent, to me is a joke. I don't think so. The father of the continents are there. The Kwame Nkrumahs of this world, you know, the Julius Nyerere of this world, the Kawunas of this world, but not at least General Museveni. That one I, respectfully kind of concur from that. But I would say that Tanzania at the moment should go back to the drawing board, and also the East African Cooperation, SADC, IGAD, AU should come out and hold the CCM leadership, to be accountable and to make concessions with the other divergent voices that are there, in Tanzania, because it's very clear this victory is not convincing with all the dead bodies that are, on the streets and all the smoke around the skies. There is no smoke without fire. So it's very important that they come to their senses and make some concessions. And to me, I feel very disappointed with the Pan African movement bodies that are around the East African Cooperation, the way it has gone at this level. The initial East African Cooperation had more actually than what sense. There are only three members: or Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Right now has been broadened, which is good. Put on board, I think, Burundi, Rwanda, I think then at some stage, I think the DRC Congo was coming on board. South Sudan is on board. I can see even, I think, Somalia was also coming on board. I think it was already there, which is good. But I think they distort. They distort. They distort the initial philosophy of the East African cooperation. Because right now in South Sudan, they don't even, I think, meet the requirements to be in East African cooperation. They've never held elections. They are very brutal to themselves. I see Salva Kiir, he has just been detained. His vice, Riek Machar, and he has kind of handpicked, judges to preside over the accusations. And I've not had any, follow up kind of voices from the East African Cooperation, from AU, IGAD. They tried the initial stages, and they even sent the late Raila Odinga. I think Museveni tried to talk to Salva Kiir, which is also another hot volcano in waiting. They're supposed to have an election in the next few months as well. So the Southern Sudan, that is around, waiting for the same kind of experience, and I think it'll be even worse than Tanzania, because in Juba, South Sudan, everybody is pretty much son. So that is very, very, very dangerous for our region. But for Tanzania, I think there's hope. Though there are divergent voices out there, I think also kind of suspects that there are external forces that are also trying to influence what's taking place there. I think there's some kind of distaste for also the current president of Tanzania. You know, she's a little bit disadvantaged. One, being a Muslim, to some degree, two, in African continent, being a lady might not be fully embraced by certain quarters. So I believe that she's somehow disadvantaged. But above all, I think she has been fair, but she's human. And sometimes when you are surrounded by psychophants, you get misguided, or distracted. So it's upon her right now to come back to, to her senses and maybe try to explore dialogue with her opponents. Otherwise, there's hope. Thank you. In the region.
All right, all right. You cannot certainly compare Uganda to Tanzania. Well, hopefully we can see some changes there and they come back to normalcy. Uganda, on the other hand, well, I will reserve my comment for now. Um,
Yeah,
um,
Just yes, you have, as I said before, Uganda, we are in for a long walk. One, even
Yeah.
the populace are not ready
Yes.
yet
Yeah.
to confront the status quo, the way the TZ and the Kenyans, challenge. In fact,
Mm.
Uganda is worse than Tanzania. Uganda is
It's a
worse
big
than even
yes. It's a
Kenya.
big question we
Yes.
often ask.
Yeah.
Are we ready? Really? Are we? Or we're still
Yeah.
well, we are still enjoying the peace we have. Not that we are inciting anyone to get onto the streets, no. But can we call for a change of systems? Can we see some democracy happening? Can we see some accountability? Can we see some transparency happening? Anyway, I come to you, Francis Kamhanda, Tanzanian president incumbent, and now also president elect. Won with a landslide victory amidst deadly protests, and she got 97% of the votes. 97%. Even our own president here, Francis, cannot, he will not, I'm sure, is afraid of waking up one morning and he has garnered 97% of the vote. How will Tanzania's unrest influence our expectations or our fears ahead of the 2026 general elections?
Actually, you know, the challenge that we have in Africa and in the people who overstay in power, it degenerates into some kind of a cult that you find the supporters, instead of advising and saying, okay, even when we are entrusted with power, let's do things that are development oriented. They reach a time where they can't even think, but rather they in cultism, once it is like a dogma, even something that is obvious, you don't see it. That is the problem. Of course, the first red flag is that there is no way, if you really say that there is democracy dispensation in a country, that a president, and Tanzania, as we know, that a president will get 90 something percent. That speaks volume. And of course, we have been seeing people like Tundu Lissu being imprisoned. We have seen our own people going to Tanzania, just generally to stand with maybe for a conference, the way how they are manhandled. That speaks volume. And therefore, I see that. I don't know what my sister Sylvia would say. I think would be expecting the same to happen in Uganda in as far as the will to go to that percentage. But what does this say? It says, number one, we have always said that there is a centralized kind of, we call it dictatorship, that it is only a one man's show. That number one, the electoral commission of Tanzania must be having issues. That was it genuine? That the results that they declared were genuine? And then number two, are we sure that I'm yet to hear the electoral observers. I had Dr. Speciosa Wandrak as we went. The East African observers, what are they saying? Do they say the election was free and fair? And what were their benchmarks? Because all these are components that we have to look at. Then number three now, I don't think even in Tanzania that the opposition can go to the courts of law, like as it is in Uganda, to go and challenge the results that have come out if they don't agree with those results. So it still leaves a lot of questions that need to be answered. But I have seen again for a fact that, in Africa, when it comes to these dictators and the long-serving presidents who are democratic phobia because they fear democracy. They will tend in their governments. You will see a lot of corruption and personal enrichment, and that's where you hear slogans like protecting the gains coming from. You will see there are weak institutions and lack of accountability. That's where you will see a person saying, don't go after the corrupt, otherwise they will take the money outside the country. You hear that across Africa among leaders who have similar characteristics. You see politics of patronage, like worshiping one person and then people being almost like the club of family and friends. And then you see like the life presidency. I don't know. In Tanzania, yes, I would say, of course, they have been the same ruling party, but they have been exchanging faces, which is a good thing. But when it comes to the same song, Chama cha Mapinduzi, is the same song in Uganda, Mzee Tova Kumeid. So it is the same thing and same characteristics, and then the fusion of the you can't differentiate between the army, you can't differentiate between the police. So they are all state apparatuses that are working for a party in power. So not until we learn to separate these different powers, then we can move forward. I'll give an example. Look at Malawi. I'm not saying it's a very perfect example, but when Mutharika was voted out of power, the man went. But when again these people they realized that, okay, I think he does better than, he has been again re-elected. So that's, if you know that you are a good leader, why can't you accept democratic process to take place without your intervention? So that if people think what you did, or they were in a better position than during your time than the current one, people have the right, they can vote you back. You than the franchising and then creating all sorts of unrest, and that is what is going to erupt into a very, very big problem when it comes to Uganda. You see, when we talk of, I had one of the panelists talk about how they are Pan-Africanists. But sometimes if we engage them in terms of what Pan-Africanism is, still you, like for example, Pan-Africanism aims at political and economic independence. Now, is it the case in Uganda, where if now people are politically independent, why do you brave them to go and vote? If people are politically independent, why do you give them a packet of salt to go and vote? You see, all these are challenges, and then I'm like, oh my God, what kind of Pan-Africanism are we talking about here? We can say empowerment and liberalism. Where is the liberalism? Where are people empowered to make their own choice? Unity and solidarity, and so on. But to make matters worse, even the other simplest issue of Pan-Africanism is humanism and community. So human dignity. Do we in Uganda, as we claim that the NRM is Pan-Africanist, do they respect human dignity? The answer is no. Do they have a sense of community? Generally, I should say, where the NRM, if I compare it to other political parties like in Cameroon, I would say that they are almost reaching where they are ideologically bankrupt with a distorted society mind. And why do I have to say that? If you go and look at the villages, if you go and look at the common man, how the common man lives in our villages, a person who doesn't have a distorted society mind would be thinking more of how do we uplift our people from this level to this? How do they access these services that can bring them up to speed? But only a leader, you only keep blaming your people that, oh, my people, they are just sleeping. That's not true. It's you, the leader, the lack of institutions that are functioning, but everything you have centralized it to yourself. But what I would say is that if we want to avoid scenarios like what is in Cameroon, what has happened in Tanzania, a country that we thought was more stable, is not to touch the election or defranchising the citizens and then continuing to push them to the margins. At least let us have some level of making decisions on our own, and then those decisions are respected in terms of leadership. But when you think you can take everything, I'm telling you, people have no option. Even Uganda, where you think that, okay, we have the army, like you have had some ministers used to brag, we have the Maje, we have the army, and so on. People will not see the reason why they should live and the reason why they should not die. It is all the same, by the way. So people will take matters in their hands. And that will be very dangerous to Uganda. And really, let me, as I conclude, let me tell you this. For Uganda, it will be worse. Because Uganda, if you analyze, even in the ruling party itself, and even within the security forces, we are likely to have warlords. I can even give an example, indicators that show warlords. You find like the whole country is fragmented along given commands of power, and then what would result would be an eruption into a revolution that we may fail to solve at the end of the day. But I still think that some of these things that take place, some of the henchmen for the ruling party would be at least picking a lesson and saying, hey, we need to clean up our house. We need to put our house in order. We need to accept that this is the Uganda that we have. We all have to protect it and progress in it, than thinking you are more of a Ugandan and you have a stake than any other person.
Right. Thank you, Francis, for that. We ought to, pay attention to the fact that we are human before we are elected into leadership, because then I always believe that humanity first in everything that we do. I always believe humanity comes first. Slivia, I come to you at this point. There are a couple of reactions for you from Joseph, who's gone, and there were a bit of questions there. I hope you took note of them. Also, Francis had a few things to say, but Slivia, I was combing through the social media spaces, and I came across a very interesting post on social media by one Duncan Mwiti on X, saying Samia Suluhu doesn't know what she has done on a global scale. She has set women's inclusion in politics years back. Whatever good grace women in politics had, it's gone. And you were saying, you were highlighting, and we appreciate the fact that you were highlighting the good she has done in Tanzania, and of course the face that she has become for women in politics. But with this comment, is it true? Whatever good grace women in politics had, it's gone. What do you say, Slivia?
Wow, thank you very much, Lee. Uh, well, starting with that comment on social media, first of all, I don't know the person who is criticizing our powerhouse woman president, whether it's he or she. So, from the angle of a woman, or I have already highlighted the good things of the president, and I did not come in the angle of a man. I'm a straight woman. So the question should be: is that person a woman or a man criticizing the women empowerment that President Samia has done? So I will leave. I will leave it at that for you, Lynn. Now, going back to the comments in the section, I will start with Mr. Kabhanda, Frank. Uh, Comrade Frank, first of all, No one is denying the historic role of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, the likes of Obote, Milton Obote, and Jomo Kenyatta in the founding of the original East African community. Uh, these are rightly honored as the architects, oh, I think that's the English word, of the first phase of East African cooperation. However, it is also equally, my comrade Francis, it is equally important to acknowledge that it is the President, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who helped to revive and expand the East African community after its collapse in 1977. In 1999, Museveni, together with President Mpaka and I believe Moi, signed the East African Community Treaty that brought the community back to life. So without that second attempt or rebirth, we would not even be here discussing about the East African community. President Museveni's influence, the East African community has grown from 3 to 8 members, and that is, I think, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, DRC, and Somalia, which was, I believe, admitted in 2023, if I remember very well. So no other leader has pushed harder for the borderless, not only East African region, but African region as a whole, other than President Museveni. So the third point is Museveni has also been the champion of Pan-Africanism. Other leaders have spoken about Africanism in a theoretical way, but Museveni has pushed it in practice. We have seen the case example of East African military operations, one area network for the telecoms. We have seen the East African Community Passport and open trade zone, and not even forgetting infrastructure diplomacy. And here I'm talking of oil pipeline, I'm talking of SGR. We are looking at roads linking Uganda, Rwanda, DRC, South Sudan, and now the push for a political federation. So, if we are to talk about fathers of Africa and East Africa, then Museveni deserves his seat at the table because of all his impact. Now, coming to other, responding to other comments, there is one person who spoke about the dilemma among the African and the regional leaders. Well, when we speak about a dilemma among African or East African leaders, we must, I strongly think that we must avoid broad generalization. You see, leadership in Africa is not a single block of, it's not just a single block. It is different countries face different historical, economic, and security realities. So I want to believe that it is important to look at facts and maybe sideline ourselves from just opinions. On the area of leadership and stability, on that comment, I think President Museveni has maintained peace in Uganda for almost 4 decades. And we need to applaud him for that. And also, this is something many African nations have struggled to achieve. Before 1986, we all remember through our history that Uganda experienced corpse, economic collapse, and mass killings. But today, Uganda is one of the most stable countries in the region. And, and that is not accidental. It is leadership, and that leadership is of President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, whether we like or not. These are facts that we cannot, we cannot just ignore. And my also comrade, I think this was, is it Okello or Okot, who I think was talking about handling on dissent voices. Well, dissent is part of democracy, but every government has the responsibility to distinguish between constructive criticism and radical destabilization. And now Uganda and Tanzania both have examples where dissenting voices were later linked to foreign funded agendas or violent mobilization. For example, the 2021 Kampala riots were not peaceful protests. Eh, These involved in killings, uh, burning properties, and organized chaos. So, and honestly, no responsible government can ignore such a threats. Eh, And I don't know if we have all been following. I remember of recent we had these activists quarrel or fight against each other over who received money. Others went on streets naked in the pretense that they were protesting against human rights in Uganda, but in actual sense they were protesting against the discrimination that was between them in terms of who gets more finances, those who ate and those who did not eat. So we can't ignore all that, and the government cannot ignore such a threat. Now, on Tanzania, when you look at President Samia Suluhu, she has demonstrated a balance between openness and national security, which I also submitted earlier on. She has again reopened political space, allowed opposition rallies, improved even investor confidence, and still protected state stability. So that is what responsible leaders look like, not allowing activism. And I was so happy when we had an issue of recent. I think it involved some Ugandan and Kenyan, and then she had to take action immediately. We should not allow activism to become a tool for disorder, as we have seen in some West African states where coups were celebrated by the same so-called activists. So we shouldn't go that far. Then, lastly, as I conclude on the regional, I want us to look at this in a regional context. The East African community is dealing with rising extremist networks, and these are done in through digital misinformation and external influence. So when we see a very coordinated anti-government narrative spreading from Uganda to Kenya to Tanzania on the same sorry, on the same platforms using the same hashtags, which is very, very important not to ignore. It is fair to question whether this is organic dissent or a regional destabilization strategy. So, as we continue with this debate, uh, let's look at the real debate that it is not whether leaders are ignoring dissent, it is whether we are willing to differentiate between democratic dialogue and sponsored destabilization. Thank you so much. Over to you, Liz.
All right, thank you, Slivia, for that. Francis in the chat room says, Slivia, tell me three things that Uganda leadership is doing that the East Africans should emulate. I think Slivia, take note of that as we give our conclusive remarks later. You will tell us what those are. Who sponsors the destabilization is another question to you, Slivia. Take note of that. But I come to you, Dr. Chisambira, and I ask because as we are, I mean, how many months do we have? About, well, they're going down. Two, okay, let's keep it at that. 2 months to the general election in 2026. Do the developments in Tanzania and the ones in Cameroon, importantly, the ones in Cameroon, because of the advanced age of the now president-elect there, serve as a warning for Uganda ahead of 2026 general elections?
And actually, Reese, my apologies to come in, but I forgot one important thing to congratulate Her Excellency President Samia for such a landslide win,
Morning.
which was paramount. And I'm hoping for Uganda for the same. And but the target is 85%. But me as an individual, I want to see 100.1% for His Excellency President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Thank you, Lynn. Bye.
Thank you, Sylvia, but wow. I don't think in the history of Uganda we have had more than 55%. Let's keep it at that of elections. But anyway, we would be surprised, perhaps. Dr. Chisambile, it's your time. All right. It looks like we lost him there. But I want to, maybe we can, I want to ask the same question as we wind up on this. Do these happenings, what happened in Cameroon, what happened in Tanzania, are these warnings for Uganda ahead of 2026? Dr. Chen, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I will answer that, but let me just comment briefly on some of the submissions made by fellow compatriots, Sylvia. One, Sylvia, when we talk here, these are facts. Fact number one is that Museveni is not father of the region or Africa. He can be a grandfather, a grandson, or a son. The grandparents of the region are Julius Nyerere, Dr. Bote, Kenyatta, and we cannot write history. That's one. Two, indeed, Arab Moi and the late Obote and even Nyerere, before the coup in 1985, had actually begun to revive the collapsed East African cooperation. In fact, I think even 2 days before the coup, Moi and Obote met in Truro to revive that. They met at the border, then they left. So it was very in progress, but because of the bad politics, that is why Museveni just what came on board. So Museveni played his part, but he's not the grandfather or the father. He's a son to in the cause. And two, you talked about that John Museveni has maintained peace for 40 years in Uganda. I don't know when you were born, I'm not sure, but as you know that half the country under Yoweri Museveni were under war, the North and the East. From 1986 to 2007, there was armed conflict in northern Uganda and part of eastern Uganda. And it's the east of Uganda, under Museveni, that we have had the highest number of rebel groups in Uganda. And the absence of the gunshot or fire does not mean peace. In fact, Uganda is worse off than pre-1986. The country is fractured, and I'm very scared that if we don't actually preach at this moment, the conciliation is a volcano. Finally, on the question about both what transpired in Cameroon, in Madagascar, in Tanzania yesterday, and so on, will impact, Uganda in the upcoming elections. I think to some degree, will motivate the Ugandan dejected voters and the youth to know that, when you stand up, your voices and issues can be heard and sometimes can be addressed. I think it's a good motivation. And watching from a distance, I don't see the NRM and Museveni even getting 70% in these elections unless they just rob openly. Otherwise, if in a free and fair elections, I think the red guys, would win. Yeah, I'm not a member. I don't belong to NUP or even to NRM, but as an observer, I can tell you, uh, people, at least their messages are resonating to some degree with Ugandans. So, in a free and fair elections, I think General Museveni will go home by 10 in the morning. Yeah. So, but I'm very hopeful that what's happening around the region in the East African countries in West Africa will motivate Ugandans, to stand up for their rights and demand for their rightful place with time. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Chen. Conclusively, Francis, I come to you. I'm asking the same question. Are these happenings, the developments in Tanzania and Cameroon, are they a warning for Uganda ahead of 2026? And maybe I could, on a lighter note, chip in. Diamond Platinums and his family flew to Mombasa yesterday after realizing they sold Tanzanians out. This is a post on social media. Kenyans took it over, started threatening to visit the hotels that hosted Diamond. The management notified him. It's alleged that he's booked the next flight to Dubai. Celebrities that decide to kiss the government's ass will not believe Simba Paka who you. So this is Josh on on X here on Twitter and saying, so are you seeing the East African solidarity? The East African community is coming together. Should Uganda start preparing for 2026? Should anything go wrong?
We need to realize that we are operating in a global village, and where information is no longer like in the past that is limited even knowledge to one individual. So what is happening across the globe, people have them at their tip of their hands, and therefore they can easily collaborate issues across the board and understand. And you find people are facing the similar problems. And that's why it is becoming, and that's why I always tell people it is important to tread carefully in as far as if you are supporting the human rights abuses just because of your political inclination. It would be better that you become at least you balance the two sides, but otherwise people will not want you to run when it is your country is on fire to their area when they have been seeing you very vocal supporting what would have changed the status quo. And for our case in Uganda and in other these countries where analysts are happening and defranchising citizens has happened, there is always the political inertia. And in Uganda, that one is at its peak. And that's why I normally call upon the sympathizers and those who support NRM that they cannot see that. If they were working towards rectifying their system, I wouldn't have a problem. Then we have seen electoral reforms or elections, once they are mishandled. I don't know why like the NRM can't learn. They claimed what they are doing is what was done in 1980 that forced them to go to the bush. But they have learned nothing and have forgotten nothing. That's the problem that I have with them. Look at all these countries like Cameroon and so on. Name them. Corruption. Corruption is like, I think, agenda number one in as far as NRM is concerned. To the extent that it is normal. I know, Lynn, if you go to some of the offices in Kampala, it's normal. You should know that, and so on. Then human rights abuse, and you find them, people praising them that, oh, these were violent people, or these are sponsored. So when people demand for their rights, it is sponsored by someone. What about when people's rights are being triumphed upon? Who is sponsoring that? So we don't want to look at that and say this is bad, this is, and therefore, if we don't look at our leadership and how we bring people in power and having transparency and accountability in as far as choosing our own people and respecting humanity, human rights, for sure we are heading trouble. You wait, when it comes to the election day, you will see how it will be confusion along the polling stations and so on. But then again, you would say, then why do you participate? Yeah, we know NRM, like last time I told we did not agree with Dr. Kisambira that they are like flies, political flies. Leave them for a wound, they are going to exploit it. So we go there, part of it we want to expose how rotten the system is and how we believe it can be changed. So I still believe that to avoid what is happening in Tanzania, as Ugandans, we must stand, but again, we should not be intimidated. We should not be intimidated. We must stand and continue fighting for our rights. At one time, we shall achieve. Thank you.
We shall achieve at one time. I hope, Dr. Sambira, you're with us, and I wanted to come to you before Sylvia can answer some of the questions that came in. I asked earlier when we missed you that I was asking that we are all preparing for 2026, and we are concluding this conversation, by the way, and we are asking, do the developments in Tanzania and Cameroon serve as a warning for Uganda ahead of 2026?
Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, panelists. Sorry, I had a slippage there. You see, one. I don't know whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage, but whatever you want to call it, is that our president has stayed on this village for quite some time. I think more than many of us, and I think that. That's the only reason that gives him an advantage over others. Okay. But if it were to sound a warning, then he should double the sound. Like that sound should be getting to him in doubles. For example, if it is coming at 60 hertz, then he should be getting the sound at 120 hertz, because what is happening elsewhere, if it comes here, it is going to be worse, because here the suppression, the repression, the oppression has been high, hard, and for long. So if it explodes, then it's going to explode more than what you're seeing in Tanzania. Today, you're living in a country where people are willing to celebrate death of others, where people are finding no sympathy for those who have gone through certain calamities, for as long as there is a small perception that they are together with the oppressor. You understand? So when it so happens that that tight knot that gives him the advantage loosens in any way, whether he falls sick, whether he is called by the Lord, whether he maybe stumbles somewhere during an electoral process and it starts or it sparks. I'm telling you, I watched some young girl the other day sending a message to Ugandans, but to the leaders in particular, that let's pray that what is going on now still happens and comes to an end maybe when Chagulanyi is still around, because she believed that it is only Chagulanyi who can speak to the ears of the young people today and they will respect and listen. So the issue is the timing. Okay, I do not know exactly when this is going to happen, but me and you know from the deepest of our feelings that it is just looming anytime. The same thing that is happening elsewhere is going to happen here, whether we like it or not. And I strongly believe, because one thing, okay, one mirror that I stand to look into to postulate this is that we have not had any credible elders left for us to speak to us when things have gone wrong. When you look around the incumbent and you study how they have been dealing with people who have tried to speak to power, people of the same age or people who have maybe probably around the same level of charisma to have that power of command to the public. They have not had that space to exercise all that. And it has left only him in the limelight, and others are just serving him as a king. So in the space that he has lost grip or he is not has loosened in any way, we are going to face what other countries have not faced before. And lastly, being that we are the book that others are reading from, if it so happens that what we have given others as solutions have turned against ourselves, I want to tell you our neighbors will have no help for us, because each of them is going to look at how to protect their niche. Today, it is easy for us to send help to them when things have gone out of hand, because we have been on this village longer than them. When you go to Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, maybe even Rwanda is at a certain advantage. But I should tell you, in the region here, when things go bad for us, we are going to have no one. If there is going to be anything like, let's say, they are sending maybe our president to South Sudan to mediate peace talks. I mean, who, when you look around this region, is willing to wear that coat to come and settle or chair a peace talk? If it maybe if we are to be there in that time, if we try to be futuristic, who around this region will you see coming here to chair a peace talk for us? Really, ask yourself that question in the honest way. Who can you see? Is it President Ruto? Is it President Samia? Is it Salva Kiir? Are they the military government in Sudan? Is it Kagame? Who do you see coming here? Is it Congo's president? I mean, who do you see coming here from our own region? So that's why I tell you that if this old heart catches fire, then it's going to be just as bad for the whole region. It's not only going to be national. So what is happening in Cameroon and Tanzania is a double warning for us. We should not just look at it as a warning, but should be a double warning for us. And it tells us, it should inform us to act quick ahead of time in trying to give people what they deserve, other than constraining the spaces further. And if we do keep constraining the spaces further in terms of, I mean, if that is what we perceive as preparation, then it's going to, we're making the situation worse and worse. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Sambida. Conclusively, Sylvia, you have a couple of questions, but I also ask, should we be worried? Should we be on the lookout as the events continue happening in Tanzania and Cameroon? Are they warning us ahead of 2026?
Thank you, Lynn, once again. Straight to your question, should we be worried or not? My response to that is we shouldn't be worried. Instead, let's join our efforts together and work for a peaceful elections in the year 2026. Now, coming back to the comments in the section, Well, Lynn, I will again start my response to Francis' comments, and this is because I can just tell that from Francis's facial expression, deep at heart, he knows the truth about the good things of the current leadership of President Museveni. And I can tell he's a very strong supporter of Museveni. But he is just choosing not to appreciate. But I know with time, he will come to the reality. Responding to this as a Pan-Africanist and Ugandan and a firm supporter of the East African community, I think I will just talk about three things in what Uganda, the three things Uganda leadership is doing that East Africans should emulate. One, I think one should be championing regional peace and security, which Uganda has consistently taken the lead in peacekeeping missions, conflict mediation, and anti-terror operations, protecting not only Ugandans but the entire uh, region at large. The other thing, the second point should be prioritizing youth empowerment and wealth creation. Uh, Through strategic programs that have been, we've seen strategic programs like the parish development model, skilling the youth and uh, industrial parks. Uganda is not just talking development, but it is also building a productive generation, which I think is very paramount for other regions to emulate. Then the third point is investing in long-term infrastructure and connectivity, like roads, power dams, oil pipeline projects, and digital infrastructure are opening markets. These things are opening markets and strengthening the dream of the integrated East Africa. Now, that is to Francis, my comrade. Now, somebody talked about destabilization. I want to think that most of the destabilization efforts are honestly sponsored by external interests working with the internal opportunists who fear um, stable leadership, and this is affecting us as a united East African market. So their intention is to weaken progress and undermine leadership and derail Africa's rise. But the good thing is that Uganda has remained firm, resilient, and alert against such forces. So it is us, the citizen, to choose. Do we want to unite with external forces, or do we want us as Africans to solve or resolve our own problems as Africans? That is
Right.
between me and you. And as I conclude, Lynn, this is my message to everyone here on the panelists and the people who are going to listen this out there, that instead of us tearing down leaders who are investing in peace, industrialization, and regional unity, let us channel our energy into building the East Africa we want, the Africa we want. Constructive criticism is welcome, but it must also be backed by facts, solutions, and a shared vision for African sovereignty. So if you truly care about Africa, then join the conversation with ideas, and let's support unity, not division. But also, let's not destroy, don't destroy. The future of East Africa will be shaped by those who rise to strengthen it, not those who sabotage it. Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity.
All right.
Lynn,
Thank you, Sylvia.
Lynn, for
And with
record,
that, you bring us to the end of this conversation. Let me see if I've missed anything in the chat room. Sylvia says that's exactly what I said. The Museveni rebirth. Uh, it rebirthed it with the help of other leaders. Sorry, Francis is saying I have to drop off the call for the next appointment. It was great having this discussion. Thank you, Francis. Indeed. Again, he says, Sylvia, I speak for myself. Let it be on record. I don't support dictators like Museveni and gross human abuse and patronage. Sorry about the kids are on holiday and so they're busy playing in the background. Sorry about that. Dr. Sembe says, thank you, Francis. Unless you have any reactions, we have come to the end of this conversation, and I want to wish you a great weekend, and hopefully things change as quickly as they Dr. Chen predicted in Tanzania, and maybe we can see it come back to some normalcy. Otherwise, I wish you the very best, and God bless you.